This is Ty Poppleton. We're here for the first season of Extreme Temple Makeover at Fellowship Church in Nashville, North Carolina. We're calling our prayer warriors together, and we're going to be working on rebuilding and restoring one of God's special chosen temples. Miss Joanne Head has had a massive stroke. The restoration process starts now. Good evening, prayer warriors! Come on out here, prayer warriors! Join us! We're here with our prayer warriors for a special occasion to come together for a special time of prayer. You know the devil has come against her, trying to break her down and destroy that temple. But even now, this is an opportunity for us to come back in prayer for her. Take a look at this video.
I remember that day well. The very first thing I did that morning, I got up, looked in the mirror, and said, "This is the day that the Lord has made." And I bet you it wasn't 10 minutes afterwards. I was going to wrap my hair in a towel, bent over, and I got so dizzy. I mean, I said, what in the world? It was just like I was going to pass out, and then all of a sudden I felt my face tingling and running down my left side. I tried to head down my hallway to get to my living room where my grandson was, and I remember it was just like something you see in a movie. I could not move hardly. I couldn't stand up straight, and it just felt like, is this really happening to me? It was all surreal. I finally got into the living room and I just couldn't see anything. So my grandson was there, and I said, "Parker, Mimi needs you to do her a favor. I'm not feeling well. Can you come dial me a number?" I said, "Dial 911. And that little angel picked up that phone. He said, "Okay, Mimi," and he picked it up. And I'm telling you, that was an angel.
I do remember April the 12th. It's still pretty vivid and pretty fresh in my memory. I was at the church, and I remember about 8:15 that morning. I remember getting a phone call. My cell phone went off, and I was at the church, and I remember stepping into the hallway to receive the phone call, and I remember Joe telling me that something was wrong, and I asked her about that, and I remember she told me that she felt numb on her body. She couldn't feel anything, and she felt very faint, and so I could hear the fear in her voice.
They were loading me up on the stretcher, and at that moment I rolled over and looked at my left, and I could see my grandson standing there. He was just as calm, and I said, "Lord, thank you that I will live to see my grandbabies. I will live and not die." Immediately, people talk about having this out-of-body experiences or seeing the lights. Well, when I finished saying that, I immediately saw the silhouette of children. And I knew right then I was at peace, and I was going to be fine.
My husband and I were in Georgia at a leadership conference with our pastors, and I got a phone call that morning from my dad, Ricky, which is uncommon to get a phone call that early. And of course I answered, and when I did, I could tell in his voice something wasn't quite right. But and he proceeded to tell me that he thought that my mom may have had a stroke, and that the ambulance had to come and get her. And
my daughter was 6 days old at this time.
I remember going and talking with Bishop and letting him know that something was wrong, didn't know what was happening. But I remember he had us get together, and we held hands and we all prayed. Probably less than 10 minutes from the house when my cell went off, and I noticed it was her phone number. So when I answered, it wasn't her, but it was a man's voice, and come to find out it was an EMS. And he asked me where I was, how far I was, and I told him. He said, "Well, we need to get your wife to the hospital now." And so I pulled up and got out of my truck. I remember walking around the corner of the house where the ambulance was, and they had already started bringing her out of the house at that time. And I knew immediately when I looked at her and I saw her face, I knew immediately that she had either had or was in the process of having a stroke, because of the way the facial features were. Her eyes were completely there was just such a wideness in her eyes, and one side of her face was drooped badly. Arrived at Wilson Memorial, and she was in the emergency room. And I remembered walking in, and as I walked in, I remember there was a gentleman standing there at her door. I didn't know who he was, never met him, but he did introduce himself to me, and he was a chaplain there at the hospital, and he had been called to the emergency room and been called to her room. And I guess it's kind of amazing, because sometimes you don't process a lot of things immediately, and I wasn't really processing that much right then. But later on, it did come to me, and I did think about that. Wow, they'd already called a chaplain down here because they knew it was that serious.
Before I called my sister and my dad back, I saw that they left me a voicemail, so I checked the voicemail, and this is when I found out about the terrible news about my mother being rushed to the hospital.
In contact with my dad, and he was telling me, keeping me updated on what the doctors were saying. They thought she had a major stroke, and there was bleeding on the brain, and that there was no way that they could do surgery to stop the bleeding, the hemorrhaging in the brain. That we were just going to have to rely on her body to fix itself. Immediately when I got this phone call, my first response was, of course, to pray. We immediately, my pastor, the other couple that had gone with us, and me and my husband, first thing we did was pray. That this was a lie of the enemy, and that
I was amazed, and so were they at the hospital, at how well my memory was, because every 3 minutes it seemed like they were coming in saying, "What is your name? What's your birthday?" And I'd tell them every time, and somehow they got it wrong at the hospital and said I was born in one year, and I said, "No, I'm not. I was born in this year." And they look at you because you've had a stroke, and they're thinking, well, she's not quite remembering. But I was adamant, and I looked at Ricky. I said, "Pull my license out of my pocketbook and show them what my birthday is. I know when I was born."
Anyway, I went on into the room, and she was sitting in the bed, and they had started giving her some medicines, and she was very coherent. And when I walked in the room, I remember she was confessing the Word. When I walked in, she was speaking the Word of God, and she was praying in the Spirit and doing those things. And so I walked in, and we talked a few moments. Started going through that process of getting her moved, and just trying to keep speaking the Word. And she was still very coherent through all of this about, what we need to do. And I said, well, she wanted me to come home and get her some clothes, come home and get her some things, and get her hairbrush and makeup and all this kind of stuff. And, woman thing, you know how that is. But anyway.
I literally fell on my face before the Lord and prayed like I've never prayed in my entire life. And I believe from the very first prayer that I prayed that the Lord heard my prayer. That's not even a doubt. I believe that immediately the restoration process began as soon as our prayers went up through faith.
A little later that afternoon, I had arrived in Greenville, and I found where she was at, and they had already put her in a room. She was in intensive care at Pitt Memorial.
Father Ricky had, and he took me into the ICU room. I must say I was a little scared for a moment, but I knew in my heart that with her young age and her determination and being a woman of God, I knew everything, no matter how severe it looked at the moment, it would be fine in the end.
My name is Dr. Shauna Patterson. I was a neurologist caring for Joanne Head while she was hospitalized with a pontine hemorrhage. She had problems with abnormal movements of her eyes. She had difficulty with the lining of her eyes, which left her with double vision. She had weakness on the right side of her face and a lot of difficulty with balance. She was unable to sit on a bed without falling over and was unable to walk without assistance.
Really tell Joe at that time the whole story. We just said, yeah, there's been a stroke, and we kind of left it at that. We didn't tell her about the bleed or anything at that, because at that point we just didn't feel that it was necessary to get into all of that at that point. But it was kind of a funny moment there, because she was very serious when she looked at me at one point. She said, Ricky, she said, whatever you do, don't you let them shave my head.
There was one point where, they were giving me morphine for my headaches, and that stuff just knocked me for a loop. But anyway, my daughter Sherry and Ricky said I would wake up during the middle of the night and just rear up in the seat, almost like if I were sleepwalking. And one night they said I was doing this, just wake up doing this. And Ricky said, honey, what are you doing? I said, I'm making a sign. He said, for what? I said, for the buffet. He said, what's the sign say? I said, help yourself. I guess I was so tired in my mind of everybody coming in just jabbing and poking on me and waking me up. It's like, it's a buffet, just help yourself.
Kevin Payne. Today's date is August 26, 2010. I first met Joanne April 22nd, 2010, and she had had a cerebral vascular accident, a stroke, that affected her vision. It caused a seventh nerve palsy, where she was unable to shut her eye, and she had severe double vision.
Throughout the process of time, of course, she stayed in ICU for a couple of days, and gradually things began happening, things began changing. I took and started taking scriptures and confessions and taping them to the head of her bed, and we were just constantly, it was like a vigil around the clock, confessing the Word of God over her body and over her life, and she was doing it and we were doing it, and we tried to be very defensive and make sure that we didn't let anybody get into her room to speak anything but life.
And we lubricated her eye with artificial tears, and over time that part got better. She was able to shut her eye. She still had double vision. We sent her to a specialist, and he created or painted a bleak picture for her, and the things were as they were, and they weren't going to get any better. But through prayer and me just following her, we made her some special prism lenses that she sticks on her glasses, and she started out needing a total of 55 prism lenses. Her eyes were this way instead of straight. And over time, she gradually started to pull back in, and I thought she was done, she wouldn't get any better, but she would continue to come back in. And I saw her about 6 weeks ago, and I told her we would make her some more glasses at this visit, and that would be her final prescription. I did not think she would improve anymore, and she has improved again, miraculously so. So I think this is definitely a miracle. We talked about that several times. This is God's doing, nothing that I've done.
I'm just so thankful of what the Lord has done in my mom's life. I know that the restoration process isn't over. No daughter wants to get a phone call that her mom, they don't know quite if it's a life or death situation. Nobody wants to get that call, whether it be mother, daughter, husband, wife.
I'm amazed by the fight, the determination that my mother gave for her recovery, and I'm more amazed by the power of God and His healing power that He has blessed my mother with.
The incredible thing here is the whole time I was treating her and telling her this is how it's going to be, or the other doctor told her that, she said, no it's not, no it's not, I'm going to get back to normal, I'm going to get back to normal. I never doubted the lady.
Never doubted for one moment that she was going to live and not die.
You hear people having accidents like this and getting depressed. She was the opposite. She actually seemed like she was excited and wanted to take this head on, and with God's help, she's beat it.